Thank you all for appearing this afternoon. Welcome to the Planning Committee. The first item on our agenda, any apologies for absence?
I haven't had any as of yet, Chair.
Thank you. Item 2, any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests? Are there any? No. Okay. Item 3 is to approve and sign the minutes of the previous meetings as a correct record. We begin at page 1. And page 2. And page 3. Somebody moves the true record, please. Thank you. Item 4, any items for deferral or withdrawal?
No, Chair.
No. Yes, thankfully. So we move on to item 5, is the determination of planning applications under the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990. And the item we will go to is item 1, which is on page 7 in Pontarddulais. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prynawn da. Okay, so this application is seeking consent to vary a previously approved scheme for residential development on land known as the Gardens and rear of 188 St Taylor Street in Pontarddulais. The application is reported to committee as the original scheme was a major development and constituted 20 dwellings, thereby meeting the committee referral threshold. Despite meeting this threshold, members are made aware that this latest application only seeks amendments which primarily relate to 2 approved plots, namely plots 11 and 12, and changes to the internal road layout around the hammerhead. So the site is currently under construction. So on the slide before you, you can see the broad location of the site. It's identified by the larger red circle. It is located off the main road through the town and in a predominantly residential area. Next slide, please. So here's a similar slide, but with an aerial image, which emphasizes the urban location of the site. Next slide, please. So here's a more detailed view of the site location plan. The majority of the site backs onto private gardens of neighbouring properties, but the southern boundary is adjacent to the bowling green situated within Coed Bach Park. Next slide, please. So since the application seeks to vary a previously approved residential scheme, I thought it would be useful to show some of the plans of the approved scheme in relation to the proposed changes. So here's the approved plan, layout plan of the site. Access to the site is from St Taylor Street, and the road travels through the centre of the site with dwellings sited along the periphery. Please note that the area subject to this application is around the vicinity of plots 11 and 12, which is on the bottom of the slide and adjacent to the hammerhead. This area is located deep into the site and mainly adjacent to the boundary with Coed Bach Park. Next slide, please. So here's the proposed layout as amended. You will note that there have been changes to the house types on plots 11 and 12, including slight adjustments to the reorientation and siting and sizes of the plots. It also involves the removal of the garage for plot 12, but replaced with outdoor parking and additional amenity space. There are relatively minor changes to the hammerhead, supported with tracking details to enable refuse vehicles to turn within the site. Next slide, please. So the proposal involved changes to 2 approved plots, as I mentioned. So here's the approved dwelling on plot 11, which is a 2-storey, 3-bedroom dwelling. Next slide, please. So here's the proposed replacement dwelling on plot 11, which is a 2-storey but 4-bedroom dwelling. This is very similar to an approved dwelling on plot 13, but without a ground floor bay window. Next slide, please. So here's the approved dwelling on plot 11, which is a 2-storey, 4-bedroom dwelling. Next slide, please. Here is the proposed replacement dwelling on plot 12, which is a 2-storey, but 3-bedroom dwelling. This is very similar to an already approved dwelling on plots 7 and 10. Next slide, please. So a proposed street scene image and the amendments are shown here, together with a proposed layout plan and an arrow pointing in the general direction of the street scene view above. Next slide, please. So turning to the photographs of the site is under construction and large portions of the site remain unaffected by the proposed changes in this application. However, I thought it would be useful to show the point of access to the site, which is from St Taylor Street. Next slide, please. Since the proposed amendments relate to areas which are deep within the site, the next few photographs focuses on this particular area. This photograph is taken from outside the site, but looking towards the direction of the proposed amendments. It is taken from a sloping grassed parcel of land towards the rear of properties on Gwynfryn Road. The arrow shown on the map adjacent to the image shows the direction that that photograph was taken. As points of references, the left-hand side of the image shows trees on the periphery of Coedbach Park. The mound of earth within the construction site is approximately the position of the hammerhead and plot 11. Next slide, please. The next photograph is taken from Coedbach Park, namely a grassed area adjacent to the bowling green. From this position, you will see the deepest part of the site and the rear of plots 11 and 14. The area on the adjacent map shows the direction of the photograph. Next slide, please. So the final photograph shows the immediate boundary with the site and Coedbach Park, which is defined by a ditch, and there is Heras fencing then protecting the site from that ditch. Next slide, please. So as highlighted earlier, this is the application which seeks to vary an approved residential scheme. The extent of changes is limited to plots 11 and 12 and the internal road layout around the hammerhead. The rest of the scheme remains unaltered. The changes are deep in the site and generally away from existing properties. The two amended dwellings would be similar to house types already approved within the site, but with minor variation. The report raises no design or visual concerns. Since plots 11 and 12 are away from existing residential properties, they do not generate any residential amenity concerns. Future occupiers of the dwellings on these plots and those already approved would not be unreasonably affected. Whilst the rear elevation of plot 11 would be closer to the rear boundary, this backs onto Coedbach Park and not other properties and is deemed to be an acceptable arrangement. One letter of objection has been received by a local resident relating to overlooking, site levels and drainage. However, the objection relates to matters in the vicinity of plots 17 and 18, which are not being affected by the proposed development and the proposed changes. Those matters are currently subject to also enforcement investigation. It is therefore considered that the amendments do not unreasonably affect the amenities and the matters raised by the objector. The Highway Authority have carefully considered the scheme, particularly the off-street parking and changes to plots 11 and 12 and the road and hammerhead design issues. They have confirmed that the road will not be offered for adoption, but the details submitted for a private road is acceptable and raises no objections to the proposal. The original scheme indicated that the potential new path would connect the site with Coedbach Park, but it is understood that this was aspirational rather than a necessity in planning terms. In any event, the path could not be secured because it relied on third-party land, of which there's been no agreement. The report goes in some detail on the planning history of the site, particularly regarding planning contributions. The approved scheme is currently subject to a legal agreement for education and highway-related contributions. A scheme of this size would normally require the provision of affordable housing. However, a viability study was submitted with the previous application, which was verified by the council, demonstrating that the scheme would be unviable with education, highways and affordable housing contributions. The planning committee at that time resolved to approve the application with a legal agreement solely for education and highway contributions. The education has commented on the latest application, indicated that the scheme generates a higher level of contributions than originally secured. The report has carefully examined this matter, and whilst the request is noted, it must be balanced by the extent of material changes that is being made to the original scheme. In this regard, only 2 plots are being affected, and there is no net gain of bedrooms or the number of dwellings. The report also notes that the updated figures used by the Education Department has not been subject to public consultation or stakeholder engagement, and thus that they have not been formally adopted by the Council. As such, it would be difficult to demonstrate in this instance that the request by the Education Department is reasonable and to request additional contributions. But notwithstanding this, since the application seeks to vary an existing permission with contributions, it would be necessary for a new legal agreement to be completed to again secure the original contributions. The report has also recommended several conditions. Some of those conditions have already been approved as part of discharging applications, and they are related to this application as well. So it's necessary to ensure that those details are also secured as part of this varied permission. So the recommendation is to approve the development subject to conditions and a legal agreement to secure those original contributions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've got one of our ward members. Did you want to speak first, Councillor Downey?
Yes, Chair. Bit complicated with the report as we are reading this report and it jumps back and forth to the last one. So, for instance, if for argument's sake we rejected this today, would they just refer to the old one and carry on? This is one of the things that got me a bit going. Then on page 13, the fourth paragraph from the end, and I'll read it out because it's the only application in front of us. The turning head has been modified to accommodate an appropriate size refuse vehicle, and a set of clear swept path analysis have been submitted. Results of the analysis suggest that the refuse vehicle could potentially turn within this head. Although this is considered borderline and would not satisfy the margin of safety required for an adoptable route. So does this mean then that because the roads are not being put up for adoption, they don't have to satisfy the margin of safety that would be required if they were to be adopted? First bit of information that I'd like on that. And then the report mentions entering into a new 106 obligation to deliver a new pedestrian crossing. Just to add, the pedestrian crossing was in the old planning application and the old 106. And then enter into a new legal agreement to secure the same contribution required by the original permission. Why do they have to enter into a new 106? And what happens if they don't sign it? You can't stop the development. It's not far off being finished. So those are just the things that jumped out at me reading this. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that.
Well, I'm not against changing 11 and 12.
Okay, thanks. Any other member? Oh, Councillor White.
Yes, can I just clarification of highways officers, please, in regards to the amended comments of the highways and the adoption of the site carriageway, seeing as we're not going to take it over for adoption. Is there any time scale as where the developer have got to let us know who the actual company is that's going to oversee the maintenance of the roads on this site, please? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah. Another member wish to speak? No? Oh, sorry. Councillor.
Thank you, Peter. Interesting what our friend Mr. White said. Very interesting to know what he said. Certainly in other areas throughout the country, certainly in the London area, a lot of new estates are going up, and they don't go for. They keep it as a private road, which I think is a great idea. And all you've got to do once a year, lock the gates to the entrance, and as long as that's there, then it remains a private road. Now the thing is this: in fairness, it's part of a rural area down there in Pontardalas, and the same with me down in Galway, a rural area. And we've got a lot of narrow lanes which will not take the big refuse lorries. And there are a number of small little vans flying around with cages on the back, and they do a great job. I don't see that as a problem. And I also think that to get this late in the building stage to come to sign a 106 agreement and to see the figures there. I remember the school in Gowerton, the English-speaking school there. Well, initially, the education asked for about $500,000 or between 800 and 900,000, and each time they did without any sort of, I don't know what guidelines there, it came from 800 or 900,000 down to about 200,000, and in the end they didn't qualify, something like that. So I mean, sometimes they pick these figures right out of the air. And I think that to try and get them to change anything, I looked at the plans here, which I thought were really quite good. The only thing I wasn't happy about was they had two next door to 11, I think it was. There were two garages. Now, I'd like, if I was living there, I'd like my car next to my house, not 100 yards away. That's the only thing I would not be happy with. Why we agreed to that, I don't know. I thought we should have said the highways person should have come along and said, well, these two, there is room either side. Why don't they have them by their side? I mean, that's what I would have thought. And the other question is, I don't know. I did see it here. You can go on the page here. Oh, that's one. Yeah. Mr. Phil Owen. Who was Mr. Phil Owen? Are you Mr. Phil Owen?
No, he's the applicant.
I know that, but Phil Owen used to work for us, didn't he? Didn't he? It's not him. I just thought he did because you can't get just checking up on you guys. All right. I got on well with Phil anyway.
There are one or two now consultants.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, Councillor Mary Jones.
Thank you, Chair. It's going back to something that actually Councillor Lewis has just mentioned, but not quite the same point. So about the garage on plot 12 being removed to provide additional amenity space. I couldn't quite see where they were going to have the sort of driveway and how you said it's narrowed the, I think the width of the driveway. So how many cars are they going to be able to get on this driveway? And they haven't got the garage. I don't agree with Councillor Lewis actually having the garages to the side because I know that is quite the norm. I've got quite a lot in my ward on the new estates. They seem to put garages in blocks. I don't say I agree with it, but it seems to work. Otherwise, the people wouldn't buy the houses. But I am concerned that we've altered the plot and got rid of the garage, and it's probably the only house on that entire estate now that hasn't got a garage. So could I have a better view of how they're going to put the cars on the drive or whatever, or wherever they're supposed to leave them?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to know the hands up. Yep, no, just 2 points to them, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll try to go through the non-highway related ones first, and hopefully with the assistance of our highways officer, we'll be able to look at the highways on it as for yourself. So talking about the legal agreement, first of all, there is a fallback position here in that we've granted the original permission for 20 houses with that legal agreement that's been signed. So if they choose to want to implement that, they can, because we do have a secured permission there with that legal agreement. But they choose not to do that. They want to proceed with this varied permission. So we have to put in another legal agreement so that it secures it with that varied permission if we granted it. If we didn't have that legal agreement there and they choose to implement as varied, then they would have no legal agreement. You can't essentially rely on the original one all the time. So every time you vary a permission, you've also got to vary the legal agreement that goes with it. When it comes to...
But we're not varying the legal agreement. It's staying exactly the same.
Okay.
So are we saying, the point is, they've already signed the original. So are you saying they've got to re-sign the original again?
Essentially, it is in a legal agreement, you would usually have to define the planning application and what the proposal is for. So in this particular case, the application's got a different reference number. It is a different scheme. So the original legal agreement could well have referenced the original application reference number. Well, if you're implementing a different varied scheme, then that legal agreement then becomes obsolete because it doesn't relate to the application reference that's before you today. So in order to bring that legal agreement up to the same reference number of the application and the same scheme, you've got to vary the legal agreement to make sure that the scheme ties up with that. So essentially, it's a technicality change more than anything.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this has come about really because there's actually a case law. I haven't got the case in front of me now, but it was found in this case that, because this is a Section 73 application in front of you now, that the Section 106 agreement needs to be tied to that Section 73 agreement for it to bite, as Elian said. Otherwise, they could implement the application in front of you without a legal agreement. So all we're doing is it's for consistency and a technicality, tying a 106 to this application, because it's a separate application, because there was one tied to the original planning application. So it's for consistency and to stop a developer saying, okay, I can implement this consent without a Section 106 legal agreement, because there isn't one with this particular application. So what we're doing is tying it in to this application as well. So it's not a new application. It's for consistency. And I hope that helps.
So going back to my original question as well, just tied in, what happens if they don't sign the new agreement?
Well, we wouldn't issue a consent until that application until the 106 is signed. So they wouldn't get their planning permission before they sign the 106. But they could implement, as I said, the old one where there is a 106 already tied in.
In terms of the modifications, the contributions don't change between the two. It's just tying up the two applications to the two legal agreements. So yeah.
Same one.
Yeah. So if this one wasn't signed, we'd look to refuse the application because they're not making the necessary contributions, but they would still have the original one to fall back on.
Shall I jump in now, Chair, with the highways comments?
Please, yeah.
Sorry, I
So
haven't had my answer yet about the garage. Or are you going to do it, Amanda?
I'm doing it, yeah. Yeah, so, well, I mean, I'll start with Councillor Jones. The garage is being removed, but if you can see, there's 3 parking spaces being proposed. So it meets the full complement. It's all shifted around a little bit, but everybody's got adequate parking. Some have got 3 on-drive parking spaces. Others have got 2 on-drive parking spaces and a detached garage. So in terms of the parking requirements, they meet the standards. As you know, adoption is not compulsory. This scheme was intended to be in private ownership from the beginning. They have submitted a private maintenance agreement, which has been agreed by the Highways Authority in terms of who's responsible for what and sort of like the frequencies of repairs, etc., etc. So basically, once you get into the site, it becomes outside the domain of the adopted highway and within the confines of the maintenance certificates maintenance company. With regard to the turning facility, if it was a normal adopted road, we'd be looking for slightly bigger, slightly wider, slightly safer, but it's a relatively small cul-de-sac with low speeds. You know, there may not even be the standard size refuse vehicles entering the site, but I think the swept paths show that if one did, it could turn within the site, albeit it might not be as simple 3-point turn like it would have been if the road was slightly wider. So in terms of highway safety, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with highway safety, it's not an unsafe scheme. And that's why we didn't raise any highways objections to it. If I haven't covered anything else, just ask away, but I think I've covered the 3 comments there.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks, Amanda. Was there anything else you wanted to add this, Dan, wasn't it? Yeah. So I got Councillor Black, then Councillor White.
Yeah, just coming back to the adoptability of the scheme. Obviously, if at some time in the future they wish to have this road adopted, does that mean they'd have to change the hammerhead, or would it just be a matter of making sure the surfacing is correct and the drainage and lights, etc.?
No, it's not as simple as that. It hasn't been designed to be an adopted road, and if they did want it, then it's subsequently adopted, they'd have to substantially change the internal layout, which would probably not be cost effective at all. You know, they do not want it adopted.
No.
They did not want it adopted,
Okay.
and if they change their minds in the future, then they'll have to, you know, demonstrate. But it's highly unlikely that we would accept, you know, a post adoption on a site like this.
Yeah, that's what I was guessing at. I thought that was the case. Just wanted to check that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that is the case.
Councillor White?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just for clarity, really then. So once all the properties have been occupied, the developer will bring in a company to take over responsibility of the maintenance. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, with residential schemes, either they enter into a section 278 with highway authorities for the roads, which then become adopted in perpetuity, or they set up a private maintenance company, and that company then, which all the residents will be part of, undertakes all the maintenance, all the repairs, and everything is completely 100% responsible for the works within the site, and the highways the highways authority doesn't get involved at all.
So that happens from day one, once the site is fully occupied, is it?
Yeah, I'd say we've only recently signed off the PMC. I think it was last week. So, I mean, the decision notice may not have gone out, but there's a couple of ongoing discharge of conditions in relation to slight tweaks that have been made within the site, and that is one of them. So yeah, that's imminently going to be discharged as far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Downing?
Not a question, Chair, but is it possible we could have a sign at the entrance of this to say that it's unadopted? Save them if the lights go out, they'd be phoning me.
Well, there is a site close to me where that is on the old Four Seasons Club. Yeah, privately owned road.
I think it is commonplace to on a privately owned road. The people want it to be retained as private, and they don't want anybody coming in there anyway. So I'd have to look into detail, but I would imagine that sort of signage will be going up on the junction access.
Okay, got no other members wish to speak? So just to remember then that this has got the planning permission, and it's just now the revised section 73. So no other members wish to speak, we can move to a vote, and when you're ready then, Gareth, please.
Yeah, Councillor Peter Black. For Phil Downing. For Alan Jeffrey. For Mary Jones.
For.
Sarah Keaton.
For.
Mike Lewis. For Richard Lewis. Nicola Matthews.
For.
Mike White.
For
Andrew Williams.
For
Unanimous, Chair.
myself.
Oh, yes. Paul Lloyd, sorry.
Yeah, I should have said that the recommendation is for approval, but it is now approved. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, and that's approved, and we will meet again on the 7th of March. Thank you.
Thank you.